Hey everybody, I'm Mark Hill.
And I'm Paul Swartwood. Hey, Mark.
Hey Paul. Thanks everybody for watching today. We're doing a presentation today on keeping mid-century Swedish glass techniques alive in our small Maryland studio. Techniques that have a lot of challenges, but also a lot of rewards and end in some very beautiful glass.
I own a small glassblowing studio called Glen Echo Glassworks. I had a very immediate feeling to the way the glass should be made and was teaching that at the studio in Glen Echo when I met Mark. He taught me about how to slow down the process a little bit and spend a little bit more effort. About 10 years ago, we decided to start working on projects that I had never heard of because I didn't have the experience of understanding historic Swedish glass the way that he did. And he kind of opened my eyes to it and helped me realize that there was a process outside of the immediate glass process I had been learning. I had a factory background of glassworking in a crystalware factory. So I kind of had this feeling about glass from the time I learned it and all the way up until we met about how immediate the process was. And that's what really drew me to the process. When I learned about all these Swedish processes working with you, I ended up getting a real appreciation for what it took to slow down the process. Mark, what brought you into trying to recreate Swedish designs that you had learned about?
I think it all started with just my love for mid-century modern architecture, design, furniture. I grew up getting dragged to flea markets and antique shows when I was a kid, and I kind of couldn't end up breaking that habit as an adult. And I found that when I'd go to some of the finer antique shows and flea markets, I was drawn to certain kinds of glass. It was always Swedish mid-century glass. And I learned about the artists, I learned about the history, and I wanted to try to find out how to recreate these techniques that I love so much in a local studio. And that's when I met Paul. He was willing to work with me as a skilled glassblower and try to solve these problems and overcome these challenges of creating amazing Swedish glass. And a lot of these techniques are not techniques that people work on nowadays. And we've really spent a lot of time trying to recreate them and accomplish them. And we're really proud of where we've gotten.
Your work really is a nod to the Swedish mid-century factory work that was coming from the designers that worked with the factory. It's not really their production line of work, but the special off-design pieces that were created.
Orifors, they were one of the largest glass factories in Sweden, and they employed hundreds of people, glass blowers, fine artists, engravers, polishers. What made Swedish glass, or Orifor specifically, special was that they would hire fine artists to work with the master glass blowers in the studio space. So not only did the fine artists get to work on creating series for stemware or production art for, like, household wares and bowls and vases and things like that, that were, the bread and butter of Orifors, but it allowed Orifors to say, every year you can explore your creativity and creative freedom to come up with your own design series and explore those design series. Each series was named and each piece was signed and numbered by the artist. Some of the most well-known series are Graal and Ariel and Kraka and Ravenna. And I fell in love with this glass, and I'm a visual designer by trade. I wanted to explore what it would take to recreate these techniques. Obviously, that has to happen in a small studio setting. I don't have access to the Orifors factory. Paul has a love for craftsmanship, which is really needed to achieve these techniques. And through the years we've been working together, we've pushed each other to learn what's required to make each of these pieces to a gallery level of quality. Cost is a huge aspect of what you're doing. You're trying to run a business, and having pieces where 30% of them break, or you've got to let them cool and then sandblast them and then reheat them, and that is not cost effective for somebody that is trying to make a living as a glass blower.
Exactly. It has to be treated as a side project when you take on all these different kinds of processes and from the ground up learning them and assuming that you can figure it out through trial and error.
There's this incredible depth in the design and the techniques that were developed in the mid-century era, where they took the sort of the technique of cameo glass, where you're etching and removing color on the outside of glass, and they turned it and they just took it farther, way farther, and created techniques where you're sandblasting really, really deep into these blanks or parisons, and then reheating those after you've dug through layers of color and layers of glass, and then either dropping a bubble on them or overlaying them to trap these air bubbles, which also added to the design, whether it's through geometric patterns or figural patterns. And the glass, not only did they just do that overlay, but a lot of times then after that, they would even take more glass and really get these designs deep into these pieces of glass. Tremendous, amazing art. There's a few glass artists that are doing the Ariel technique. And then there's the Kraka technique, which is using netting to capture a pattern of bubbles along with the netting pattern. And there's also the Ravenna technique, which is rather than creating a bubble and letting it cool and sandblasting a thick bubble of colors, you are fusing plates together and sandblasting a plate or a series of plates, and then sandblasting that series of plates, adding frit or leaving the holes or channels free to capture bubbles, and you're dropping a bubble on top of those. And Paul and I have tried all these techniques. We first started trying the Ariel technique because there's such a challenge in the execution, but the end product can be such an amazing experience to see final, and it's so much fun. There was a lot of sort of trial and error with that process of learning how to overlay and pick up those blanks, those heated blanks, and to pick those up at the right temperature to overlay a bubble backwards on that piece of glass is quite a challenge. But Paul, you and I kept working at it until you really had it down, and just it's not something that a lot of glass blowers can do nowadays.
Yeah, and doing all those different techniques, it's funny, in the order that you listed them there, they actually taught us the next step to the next process of the next design that we were going to be working on. It was really surprising to see how us inverting bubbles inside out to get color on the outside and doing fancy overlay techniques and going through what must have been a half a dozen versions of tools that we designed to make that. And somehow or another, it always comes back to the simplest is the most easy. It's amazing. And we go through a wide variety of tools, and we come to find out that a nice proper heat and a newspaper will do all the work for you, or maybe just a set of wood jacks and get all the way back there. And then you get to move on through the process and not wrestle over the small things anymore, like getting your color on. That can't be the hardest part of these pieces. It needs to be one of the easier parts.
It's funny because, one of the reasons that we didn't just start with wood jacks or didn't just start with paper was because of aurifores. And some of the research that I did in the beginning, when you and I were sort of going back and forth trying to figure out, well, how the heck did they do this? And, a lot of the research that I found was they actually custom made tools for each of the different parts of the process, which helped them perfect their end product so much faster than we could. And we're getting people that aren't familiar at all with what we're requesting of them, say like a wood mold maker or somebody that makes jacks, to make us some kind of odd set of jacks that we sketch on a piece of paper. It's just not the same. And we found lots of challenges and, success in there as well, in terms of what the right answers were for us versus what the answers were for aurifores. In a small studio space, we're kind of cobbling together different kinds of pieces and things like that. So
the necessity really does drive the invention of the tool.
The technique that we found to be the most difficult of the four techniques that we just mentioned is the Ravenna technique. The Ravenna technique was developed by an artist by the name of Sven Palmqvist. He's the only one that worked on the Ravenna technique at aurifores. He took a trip to Ravenna, Italy, and was inspired by the mosaics, in the Byzantine mosaics. And with aurifores already doing a lot of sandblasting, he wanted to figure out a way to create these mosaic patterns in bowls and other forms. And again, took to sandblasting and found that the way to do that was through plates, plates of glass, and dropping a bubble onto a flat, hot plate of glass or multiple plates of glass. And frankly, the only reason that I know that is because I have one image that I found, one image from all of my research that shows a Ravenna that's unfinished. It's an Orifors Ravenna, unfinished, and it has the bowl on the bottom, but it has the rest of the bubble on the top, and you can see where it was broken off the pipe. And I badgered Paul about this stupid idea to try to recreate this technique, and pushed until he didn't want to hear me push anymore. And so we started working on this technique. And I feel like when we tried it, we knew it could become something. Do you agree?
I do, yeah. I also was really confused as to how that piece, like that picture that you had showed me, I just didn't understand it. I hadn't seen anything like that done in glass before, and it just didn't quite make sense as to how it had become what it was already and wasn't even finished yet. So
Yeah,
I was in a little bit of disbelief about how these pieces were made. I honestly didn't get it. So it was really fun to take that project on and say, okay, fine, let's try it.
right.
Let's try it.
This is a piece of plate glass, and it has a 1/4 inch or an 1/8 inch of clear, and it's been fused to yellow. Same thing with the green. And what we do is we fuse those in the kiln to reduce the bubbles from the interior and get them connected. If the bigger the piece, the thicker it is. So on pieces that are this big, say, like this piece here, it's very thick. It's got 3/8 of an inch of clear and 1/8 of a color. And you can see that this piece has this green material on it, which is sandblast resist. What I do is I take these designs and I measure out the plates. So we've got some small plates and large plates, some different things. And these come from sketches that I've worked on, just inspirational types of things. And I print this and I put it over top of this with some resist, some spray adhesive. And then I hand cut the pattern, whatever that pattern is, onto this resist tape. And the pattern, this is a very standard pattern here. This is a very standard style Ravenna pattern. And we're just doing something to just do a little ode to Sven and Orifors. I have this in a larger size as well. We like doing larger and smaller. I like doing larger and smaller sizes of the same pattern to create series. And here's a piece that has been sandblasted. So you can see we blast down until the blue is removed. Next, I take all the resist tape off. I scrub it with a brush to get all of the sandblast material, all of the glass material, and bring it to Paul. From that point, we either put the piece in straight if we would like these to just be bubbles, or we pick this up with a color so that the bubbles will become a color and interact with the blue. Or we fill this with grain, which is broken up shards of glass in color. And we have done that before. Like, I'll show you a piece that's some halfway through the process that has green grain in the grooves. And we would fill that up. I'd bring it to Paul, take care of all that, and we put it in the annealer.
We ramp it up for about 12 hours up to about 1,000 degrees, and then we spike it up to about 1060 just before pickup time, so it has a little extra stress relief on the top of the plate, and it helps with the last minute stress of getting that enormous plate from the bottom of a bubble into the furnace. So we run that over to the heat. We start balancing out the temperature and start creating more of a expanded bubble, and pushing the air against the interior bubble into the plate forces those bubbles sealed all around the edges, and we can start shaping the piece as one instead of a bubble with a plate on the bottom. There's a lot of overcooling and then slightly heating and blowing. And there's a lot of back and forth that we had to learn was not typical with typical glass blowing, where you need to maintain a standard heat from beginning to end. We had to build up a standard heat over the course of many different heats, and then we could start working on it instead of just hopping into it and heating it all up.
A lot of times we cap the end of the pipe to hold that air pressure in so that we can push against the outside of the bubble.
That plate inherently is not going to heat evenly. So as we go into the furnace to balance out the heat, we're constantly pushing the outside lip of the plate back in while the center is able to build up heat, and we can cap the pressure in there to keep forcing a direction to where the piece is going to go instead of collapsing from all the pressure we have to push on it. There's a lot of balance there. Then there's the foot.
Then there's the foot.
When we started out with the foot idea, we started thinking that it must have been gathered on. So then in my mind, I had it assumed that they must have had an enormous bubble that they stuck into their enormous furnace to gather on and create that amazing curve that were on the bottom of all these pieces. I didn't understand that it was actually attached from the side, maybe from the top, and then perfectly blended along with this plate that they had so many hours put into it already, and in such a time-sensitive manner it had to be achieved, because there's no other way it could have been achieved without perfect melding and timing of the two parts. And it's amazing to realize that after so many different methods. There's so much work in these already before I even get to them that it makes it really tense when we're in there and we have a team of 4 guys that are all working towards our common goal of getting this piece happily in the oven.
We're going to show you a video demo of a couple of pieces being made in Paul's studio. And a big part of making these pieces is not over yet. This has come out of the annealer at Paul's studio with a large bubble up top and a foot that may be even this much off of the piece. And it has a jagged edge, and the top of the bubble has a jagged edge. So what we do is after it's been annealed for 36 hours, then we start to, we take a tile saw and we trim all of the excess off in preparation for final polishing. The lip is done where we grind down all the remaining clear to the edge of the piece. We follow the line of the edge of the piece, and we do that with a lathe, which, you know, we are talking about 6 to 8 steps, including like your last glass finish polish. This is from the same demo, but you can see this one was picked up rather than with a clear bubble. This was picked up with a green, a lighter green, so that it mixes nice with the blue, but your bubbles aren't totally clear. You've got a nice green accent color. This is a really good example, high quality example of where we've gotten with this process. And it's a really good ode to Sven and Orifors. And as you can see from these photos, once the pieces are taken down with the lathe to a glass finish, we've got some really tremendous special pieces that not a lot of people know all the time and effort that have gone into these pieces. They really are a special technique that's sort of been lost in history for various reasons, and we're proud to be a part of keeping them alive. We've been showing our work together, for about 12 or 13 years now?
Yeah, mostly at the Glen Echo Partnership. They've been our greatest supporters of our process from the beginning, before the Ravenna, all the way through, and a great help. They have a beautiful gallery that they show our work in every year, and picking up as much outside gallery work as we can make the work for.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed our video recreating Swedish techniques in our small Maryland studio. We wish that we could have seen you all in person, but we appreciate you watching and hope to meet you someday.
Thanks, everybody.